got an attack here. I guess you know that.
2 is next. It is.
Now going back to Baghdad.
I need Amman, I need Saudi Arabia, I need the White House, I need the Pentagon. Don't interrupt us. We gotta get the book. Who is it? Interrupting Baghdad right now.
Baghdad continues to be a target.
This area is under threat of imminent attack.
Planes that are on the ramp are taking off. I can see a jet plane taking off right now.
Right now, I think we should get it. Okay, guys, break it down. Out of here. Move.
The first war in the last decade of the 20th century. A global audience of untold millions. A world eavesdropping from the highest councils to remote outposts. People were frozen in concentration, disbelief, wonderment. Fall and early winter of 1990 and 91. A dangerous time of firsts. The first play for power in the new post-Cold War era. A challenging test of extraordinary cooperation between the superpowers for the first time since they fought the Nazis. The United States and the Soviet Union, partners against one who would smash a fragile peace within the family of nations. The first time a nation would try to break out and become a regional superpower in the explosive Middle East. The first time in a century that one Arab country invaded another, Arab fighting Arab. The first test of America's armed forces with its new faces, including women close to the lines of battle. Western troops anticipating chemical and biological attacks for the first time since World War I. The maiden battlefield test of expensive and new computerized weaponry, including the Patriot missile, canonized as the war's first hero. And for the United States, the first war since Vietnam and the most popular one among Americans since the Second World War. Hello, I'm Bernard Shaw. Human beings on this planet began the last decade of the 20th century with hope. The guns of war were silent. Iran and Iraq, exhausted by 8 years of fighting, had staggered to a peace each side could live with. Relations between Moscow and Washington had so thawed that people dared to believe the Cold War was over. Freedom and reform were rolling across Eastern Europe. Everywhere, barriers were falling. Suddenly, profoundly, there was war in the Gulf. What went wrong? On this most ancient of battlefields, war exploded, triggered by contentions over oil, driven by grievances colonial powers imposed, and assured by a world searching for order, a world refusing to watch a militarily strong nation impose its will on a weak neighbor. Thus, this story of leaders, warriors, historic hatreds, and the strategy surrounding the Gulf crisis that became the Gulf War. Natives say the sky literally changes in summertime, becoming dull and lifeless. One Washington wit describes it as the color of television tuned to a dead channel. At a time of year when heat and humidity slow the federal government and drive up the murder rate, this first day of August 1990 is unbelievably wonderful. 85 degrees, humidity only 36%. Barely a hint of the storm to come. The talk on the street was of Mayor Marion Barry smoking crack and First Dog Millie getting lead poison.
Mr. Keating,
At the highest levels of government, the most important issue seemed not to be the S&L bailout, or the new Civil Rights Bill, or even the end of the Cold War. No, on this warm Wednesday in August, topping the agenda, getting out of town. Like so many others in the United States Capitol, President Bush was looking forward to vacationing on the shores of New England. But first, a typical day of political wrangling and photo opportunities. The battle over a new budget would end this day in stalemate. The 41st president retires to the family quarters on the 3rd floor of the White House, unaware he would soon be facing the biggest gamble of his political career. At approximately 8 p.m., an aide delivers an urgent message from the White House Situation Room. Iraq has invaded Kuwait.
We have some drama unfolding in the Middle East to report to you tonight. Diplomats in Kuwait are now saying that Iraqi troops have crossed the border into Kuwait.
As the president follows the latest reports from CNN and the CIA, the signs grow more ominous. Soviet-built Iraqi tanks rumble through the Kuwaiti capital. One member of the royal family is killed. The rest, including the emir, are forced to escape to safety in Saudi Arabia.
Well, I'm sitting here overlooking the American embassy and the palace of the emir. We hear continuous small arms shooting from that area.
The entire Gulf has been stunned. It's been greatly shocked by
the Revolutionary Command Council on Thursday is announcing that the Kuwaiti government has been overthrown.
Masterminding the invasion is a dictator whose strength has inspired the dreams of the disenfranchised and terrified the rich and powerful throughout the Arab world. Saddam Hussein, president of Iraq and leader of the world's 4th largest army, 1 million men under arms. Saddam. In Arabic, it means one who confronts. The one who confronted Kurdish rebels with chemical death. One who confronted his political rivals with torture and the point of a gun. Confronted his eastern neighbor, Ayatollah Khomeini, in an 8-year war that killed hundreds of thousands of Iranians and equal numbers of his own countrymen. Parts of his nation were in ruins, the economy in shambles. And now the one who confronts turns his attention to his rich Arab cousins to the south. Kuwait, a jewel box slightly smaller than New Jersey. It has been called Kuwait Inc., a snide term to many, but to Kuwaitis, their staggering wealth and the clever way they invested it is a badge of pride. Kuwait was among the poorest of nations until oil started flowing in 1946. Now, Kuwait's portfolio of international assets is nearly $100 billion. The source? 94.5 billion barrels of oil beneath the sand, enough for more than a century of production, the world's 3rd largest proven petroleum reserves. But relatively scanty defenses to protect the ruling Sabah family. There are more than 500,000 Bedouin tribesmen and wards and 1.5 million others. There is much to protect. Though some outsiders live in squalor, Kuwaiti citizens have it made. Free housing, telephones, education, medical care. The streets are lined with Mercedes, and everywhere the glint of gold, the smell of crude. All of this is tantalizing to Saddam and irritating. In a region where envy is as big a product as oil, Kuwait symbolizes the growing rift between the haves and the have-nots in the Arab world, between the proud forces of Arab nationalism and the bitter legacy of European colonialism. Following the First World War, victorious Europeans carved up their Middle Eastern enemy, the Ottoman Empire, recklessly slicing through tribal areas and traditional routes of commerce dating back before the time of Muhammad. Among the lines arbitrarily drawn in the sand were Kuwait's borders with its deep water port and 2 small islands. What had once been Mesopotamia was now Iraq, from the start envious of its neighbors' access to the Persian Gulf. Stolen, says Iraq, were the 2 islands needed for a deep water shipping port and part of an oil field known as Rumallah.
Now, in the light of Iraq's territorial claims, a British
In
commando
1961,
air carrier is
Iraq celebrated Kuwait's independence from Britain by threatening to invade. But British troops kept the peace, the first of several gunpoint border disputes, the first of many small irritations that would shape a relationship of confrontation between these two Arab countries. These times would shape a new leader in the Arab world, the one who confronts Saddam. Ironically, it would be the money and arms and political support of his future enemies that would also help change Saddam Hussein from local strongman to leader of a regional power armed with some of the world's most devastating weapons worth more than $50 billion. Saddam Hussein's weapons were financed, perhaps inadvertently in some cases, with loans sanctioned by the United States, Saudi Arabia, and yes, even by Kuwait. Kuwait loaned Iraq about $32 billion to help fight the war against Iran. And now the emirs wanted some of their money back. But Iraq, with an $80 billion war debt, had a different point of view. Saddam saw the Kuwaitis as ingrates. He had borne the cost of protecting his Arab neighbors from the Ayatollah's fundamentalist regime. Iraq said Kuwait had stolen nearly $2.5 billion worth of oil from its Ramallah oil fields, siphoning it off by slanting drills into Iraqi oil. Iraq also complained that Kuwait had been one of the oil cartel members exceeding OPEC production limits, helping to drive down the price of oil from $20.50 a barrel in the opening days of 1990 to a mere $13.60 a barrel by summer. The drop of each dollar in the price of oil meant $1 billion less for Iraq. The one who confronts swore he would stop Kuwait and the United Arab Emirates from continuing to depress oil prices. Saddam Hussein issued an angry warning. The oil quota violators have stabbed Iraq with a poison dagger. Iraqis will not forget the saying that cutting necks is better than cutting means of living. O God Almighty, be witness that we have warned them. Warnings? Miscues? Missed signals? How much did President Bush know of the crisis to come? And when did he know it? The White House and State Department are silent. But the intelligence community is tracking unexpected troop movements inside Iraq by satellite. This much is known to all. In the months leading up to his invasion of Kuwait, Hussein is caught trying to import components of triggering switches for nuclear bombs. A British journalist is hanged. A threat is made to destroy half of Israel with chemical weapons. July 16th, a meeting of the Arab League. Iraq's foreign minister warns Kuwait and other Arab states, our country will not kneel. As Iraqi rhetoric grows more shrill, cables from the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad show little concern about Saddam Hussein's intentions. The White House remains quiet. July 18th, Baghdad radio broadcasts a letter from the Iraqi foreign minister to the Arab League, charging Kuwait with systematically, deliberately, and continuously harming Iraq by encroaching on its territory, stealing its oil, and destroying its economy. Such behavior, it says, amounts to military aggression. July 20th, Israeli Defense Minister Moshe Aarons meets with U.S. Defense Secretary Dick Cheney to show evidence that Iraq is bracing for war. July 23rd, U.S. intelligence satellites confirmed at least 30,000 Iraqi troops are on the Kuwaiti border. But on July 24th, the State Department spells out Washington's policy on Kuwait.
We happen to know if the United States has any commitment to Kuwait to defend Kuwait or to assist it against aggression.
We do not have any defense treaties with Kuwait, and there are no special defense or security commitments to Kuwait.
July 25th, Saddam Hussein calls in the U.S. ambassador to Iraq, April Glaspie. He assures her he will not invade Kuwait, and Glaspie, on orders from Washington to pursue quiet diplomacy, states, "We have no opinion on the Arab-Arab conflicts, like your border disagreement with Kuwait." She tells President Hussein that President Bush wants, quote, better and deeper relations with Iraq. August 1st. At a White House meeting, the CIA says in its early morning briefing that an invasion is 70% likely within the next 24 hours. By midday, the CIA revises the estimate up to 90%. At 6 p.m. Washington time, Iraqi troops cross the border into Kuwait.
Full control of the military situation in Kuwait, the nation they invaded, and a dispute over borders and oil production.
The UN Security Council has been working all night on a resolution to condemn Iraq. The White House says the U.S. is deeply concerned about this blatant act of aggression and demands the immediate and unconditional withdrawal of all Iraqi forces. And while visiting in
the United States is trying to deal with this crisis rationally, calmly. U.S. officials, senior U.S. officials, have been up all night monitoring the situation in the Situation Room at the White House.
Do you contemplate intervention as one of your options?
We're not discussing intervention. I would not discuss any military options, even if we'd agreed upon them.
Later, the president would recall he made an almost instantaneous judgment that the United States must intervene. For now, the only judgment expressed is a strong rebuke of Saddam.
The United States strongly condemns the Iraqi military invasion of Kuwait. Needless to say, we view this situation with the utmost gravity. We remain committed to take whatever steps are necessary to defend our long-standing, vital interests in the Gulf.
In the language of governments and diplomats, vital interests in the Gulf translates oil. And now, by occupying Kuwait, Saddam Hussein controlled 19% of the Earth's oil reserves and another 25% within reach just across the border in Saudi Arabia.
Soldiers have been on the rampage.
I want there to be no misunderstanding. I will hold the government of Iraq responsible for the safety and well-being of American citizens held against their will.
It's going to be a bloody conflict, and America will lose, and America will be humiliated.
An extraordinary multinational military force. $690,000 troops from 28 countries. Many with competing interests, conflicting goals, until now. Now, united against Saddam Hussein.
The fact is that it is not the United States against Iraq. It is Iraq against the world.
Initially, the president responds cautiously to the invasion of Kuwait, freezing Iraq's assets and protectively Kuwait's.
Anything new on the Gulf?
What's going on in the Gulf?
Any new developments, Mr. President?
No, I had a long talk with King Fahd just now.
What does he want?
Well, we're just reviewing options, and he's going to have some meetings over there.
British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher advocates going a step further, bolstering the design for what would become U.S. policy in the Gulf.
None of us can do it separately. We need a collective and effective will.
With the commitment of British support, the president starts lining up the multinational effort to stop Saddam.
Mr. President, how can you and other world leaders prevent the installation of what you've termed a puppet government?
Just wait. Watch and learn.
He works the phones with a personal style honed during a career as a congressman, CIA director, ambassador to China and the United Nations, and as vice president. Now, with a crisis in the Gulf, Bush dispatches Secretary of State James Baker to help cement the coalition of nations opposing Saddam. Military, economic, political promises are made. Within days, President Bush has forged an unprecedented international alliance. After initial reluctance to speak out, 14 of the 21 members of the Arab League vote against Iraq. With new bite from the cooperating superpowers, the United Nations Security Council unanimously approves mandatory economic sanctions against Iraq. The United States and Soviet governments issue a joint statement against Iraq.
We take the unusual step of jointly calling upon the rest of the international community to join with us in an international cutoff of all arms supplies to Iraq.
The Soviet Union's support is crucial. Moscow had been one of Iraq's chief suppliers of military equipment. Its military advisors were still in Baghdad when Soviet-built tanks led the invasion of Kuwait. As the crisis grows more complex, President Bush is determined to maintain an appearance before the cameras, an appearance of business and pleasure as usual.
All right, here we go. Nice and easy.
Yes.
He vacations in Maine.
So have you talked with the White House Situation Room yet, sir, this morning?
I talk to him every morning at 5:30, and I'm not going to take any more comments up here, though.
Meanwhile, Saddam Hussein cultivates his own television image. Several thousand U.S., British, and other nationals in Kuwait and Iraq are held hostage. Guests, Saddam calls them.
Are you getting your milk, Stuart? And with cornflakes, too.
He tells the world that some will be sent to military and industrial sites in Iraq, human shields, to deter a potential attack. Bush also addresses the world.
4 simple principles guide our policy. First, we seek the immediate, unconditional, and complete withdrawal of all Iraqi forces from Kuwait.
The restoration of Kuwait's legitimate government, the stability of Saudi Arabia and the Persian Gulf, and American citizens abroad must be protected.
A fifth objective soon emerges.
What is at stake is more than one small country. It is a big idea, a new world order.
A new world order born out of the end of the Cold War and the death of universal communist rule in Eastern Europe. Born, too, out of fears that history might repeat itself.
As was the case in the 1930s, we see in Saddam Hussein an aggressive dictator threatening his neighbors.
Bush, a veteran of World War II. At age 18, the youngest pilot in the Navy. 58 combat missions before he was shot down and rescued in the Pacific.
Half a century ago, our nation and the world paid dearly for appeasing an aggressor who should and could have been stopped, and we're not about to make that same mistake twice.
But convincing other countries with their own agendas requires maximum diplomatic finesse. Japan, far more dependent on Middle Eastern oil than the United States, initially offers $10 million to help hundreds of thousands of refugees pouring out of Iraq into camps, lacking adequate food and sanitation. Japan eventually raises its pledge to $13 billion, money for the military confrontation. Syria, The U.S. State Department called it a sponsor of terrorism.
We are not embracing Syria and everything that Syria has done with which we disagree. We will continue to disagree.
But now, Syria's president, Hafez al-Assad, becomes a valued member of the coalition. And despite the image of superpower harmony, Bush and Gorbachev disagree over linking the future of the Palestinians to an Iraqi withdrawal from Kuwait.
And it seems to me that there is a link here.
But the thing that I feel strongly about is that these issues are not linked.
President Bush presses on. At the United Nations, he speaks of life after the Cold War, of a new world order.
A partnership based on consultation, cooperation, and collective action. I see a world of open borders, open trade, and most importantly, open minds.
But Bush's vision of a peaceful future is challenged by the political messiness of the present.
No war now! No war now!
Despite his pledge to promote democracy, critics charge the president is going to war to protect oil, to protect rich autocratic monarchies. And just before the shooting starts, the more cooperative Kremlin takes a page from old Soviet regimes, ordering in troops and tanks against Lithuania's independence movement, killing at least 12 people. Clearly, there is disorder in the New World Order, so much so that a historic coalition of armies is assembled in the Middle East. They would find out if their political success, agreeing on a common cause, could be duplicated in battle.
Iraq will not be permitted to annex Kuwait. And that's not a threat, it's not a boast, it's just the way it's going to be.
Mr. Bush, ladies and gentlemen, is sending your sons to a war which has no human value or meaning.
With an easy smile, the pat of a small shoulder, a confident wave, Saddam Hussein stared down a world as it tightened its military and economic stranglehold, and he refused to blink. Whether granting interviews dressed in pricey Parisian suits or parading before his troops in military uniforms he designed himself, Saddam's public image is proud, fearless. To many in the Arab world, a symbol of dignity and strength. To other worlds, another strongman, ruthless and brutal.
I would like to tell my wife and family that I am alive and well.
I think our leaders and our people have wrongly attacked the peaceful people of Iraq.
Captured Allied flyers showing signs of torture are made to perform for the cameras in violation of Geneva Convention mandates.
Boy, that one has hit me right square in the heart, I'll tell you. It's just outrageous what he's done.
A sickening sight. Thousands of gallons of crude gushing into the Persian Gulf, deliberately released.
No military advantage to him whatsoever in this. It's not going to help him at all. Absolutely not.
To many Arabs, Saddam Hussein's defiance is a call for unity and self-reliance, a blow against years of foreign domination, an attack on the infidels.
What he has is the appeal to rage. There is no appeal for Saddam Hussein as much as there is an appeal for the confrontation with the West.
It was, after all, the colonial overlords who exploited the Arabs, reshaping the Middle East for their own economic gains after the First World War. After World War II, the West helped the Jews establish their own state in the midst of Muslim Holy Lands. Today, the West supports the rich oil emirs, often seen by the millions of poor and working-class Arabs as decadent and spoiled.
To the extent that they felt betrayed, to the extent to which they have no stake in the existing order, to the extent to which their sense of powerlessness defines their existence, this beacon of power, this beacon of strength who will confront the West, stands there and gets larger than life. He becomes the baddest brother on the block.
He says it is his destiny to become the heir to the legend of Nebuchadnezzar, the godlike king of ancient Babylon in the land that would become Iraq, to become the leader of a new Arab nation spanning the Middle East.
He was a man who, really going back to his childhood, went out for what he wanted and let nothing stand in his way.
Pieces of the puzzle that is Saddam Hussein were crafted in a childhood filled with coups and conspiracies, poverty and hatred. Hatred for the British who fought and imprisoned the uncle who raised him. Hatred that grew in his student days when he joined the Ba'ath Party, an underground anti-Western group campaigning for Arab unity. Hatred that hardened a 22-year-old into an assassin, handpicked to kill Iraq's military ruler, Abdul Karim Qasem. The attempt failed. Saddam escaped with a bullet in his leg. Part of a growing legend that already included the murder of a party rival, his own brother-in-law. Cairo, where he studied law at a time when Egypt's charismatic leader Gamal Abdel Nasser was electrifying crowds with his message of Arab unity and freedom, a legacy Saddam Hussein would later claim as his own.
The storied city of Baghdad, capital of Iraq, has been the scene once more of bloody revolt that has seated a new government.
Back in Baghdad, his rise through political ranks was quick and ruthless. A 1968 coup pushed the Ba'ath Party into power, with Saddam the deputy chairman, ruling behind the scenes and serving as organizer of the secret police, titans of torture. He was the architect of Iraq's plans for nuclear and chemical weapons. He was creating a power base for that moment in 1979 when he would take the title of president and take lives to remain president. When the ethnic Kurdish tribe in northern Iraq challenged Baghdad for independence, Kurds were silenced with chemical gas. 5,000 men, women, and children died. Entire villages were smashed to the ground. Criticism of Saddam's police state, no matter how slight, is silenced with torture and death. Amnesty International reports 10 to 20 hangings each month, including many Iraqi Jews. Even those close to him are shown no mercy. This is Iraqi video of Saddam shortly after becoming president, telling party members of a conspiracy against him. One high official gave a fabricated confession naming several co-conspirators, while Saddam coolly puffed on a cigar. Saddam then read his own list, which included the name of a lifelong friend. Each person named was escorted from the room and later shot. Those left behind broke into nervous applause.
Saddam Hussein really rules by fear, and his advisors are basically sycophants who are afraid, for very good reason, to counter Saddam Hussein.
Political loyalty is sealed with blood by forcing party members to become partners in punishment by death.
On the occasion when the Communist Party was outlawed in Iraq, he not only had 500 members rounded up and sentenced to death, but he had his own ministers perform the executions of them.
The eyes of Saddam are everywhere, reinforced by 100,000 East German trained secret police. But terror and torture are only part of this man.
We have seen a negative portrait of Saddam Hussein. We have not seen, as an example, what Saddam Hussein has done for the population of Iraq.
Modern Iraq, superhighways, universities, and hospitals, free medical care, compulsory education. Nearly everyone in Iraq is literate. Though Iraq is deeply Muslim, Saddam allows women to wear Western dress, to get equal pay for equal work, and to have paid maternity leave. There is some religious freedom.
He has been able to distribute much of the wealth of Iraq coming out of the revenue of oil, all the way down to the lowest masses. Per capita income distribution in Iraq is one of the best ones in the Middle East. And he has given the Iraqi people a sense of focused national aspiration.
And the people respond passionately. Painters pay tribute to his image with streaks of their own blood. Children sing of his exploits. Saddam, we will give our blood for you, is one line from an Iraqi children's song.
He likes children. At least that's a very important part of his media personality. And when he takes a child in his hands and holds it and caresses it, you can see vividly that this child trusts him, is under his authority 100%, and as a result, he will be safe. He will be safe. And that's the message, you know? So you have this kind of the ruthless and the compassionate.
These contradictions create a distorted picture, an unpredictable leader who goes to war against 28 nations, yet inspires adulation on the streets of the Arab world. A puzzle for sure. Is he a savior for his people and the Arab world, or is he another of history's madmen? This much is certain. Saddam Hussein is not invincible. The man who would not blink before the world blinks continuously in an interview with CNN's Peter Arnett. After the war began, Saddam batted his eyes as often as 40 times a minute, twice as fast as he did in an interview a few months before. Experts say such blinking could be a sign of shell shock. Some say it could signal a mental collapse. While Saddam Hussein continued staring down the world, in his appearance, he became less intimidating.
Today, I am more determined than ever in my life. This aggression will not and must not stand. We're dealing with Hitler revisited, a totalitarianism and a brutality that is naked and unprecedented in modern times.
The bombs, the rockets, the missiles would not fall for months. Nor would there be the bloodshed from Desert Storm for months. Would Iraq's President Saddam Hussein permit words, diplomacy, to coax him back across his border, back from war's brink to avoid the showdown? While the new coalition opposing him hoped and worked for peace, the coalition prepared for war.
And disturbed because my life will be changed. But I just keep praying and wish for his safe return when it's all over.
For the sailors, airmen, Marines, soldiers, and their families, the hell of war comes long before any shots are fired.
I just think the Navy shouldn't let daddies go away this long, but still, they have to keep the world safe.
You're a great Navy family. God bless you all, and farewell.
It is gut-wrenching, leaving the family's warm bosom. Loving security one day, danger the next. Paratroopers from Fort Bragg, North Carolina, were the first to say fast goodbyes. In darkness, they hurried to answer the president's call on the night of August 7th. Within 24 hours, the harsh Saudi desert was their new home.
The mission of our troops is wholly defensive.
Open it up, gun two down.
Hopefully, they will not be needed long.
But the training at America's military bases intensified as thousands more men and women got in shape to ship out.
Let's go. Inside. Good luck all the way around.
Forward, march, left.
All right.
Left.
Forward.
Left.
Reserve units were activated, the first time since the 1968 Vietnam Tet Offensive. Doctors, lawyers, ministers transformed from what many called weekend warriors to full-timers.
Face to your right. Forward. Ha!
Within 3 months, 180,000 GIs. Hundreds of aircraft. Hundreds more tanks. And billions of pounds of equipment in place in Saudi Arabia. It was the fastest deployment in United States history and the largest since Vietnam.
Anything you all want to know? If I don't know the answer, I'll just make it up.
One of the chief architects, Stormin' Norman. H. Norman Schwarzkopf has that nickname because he throws things when he's angry enough. But this four-star general is also known for his IQ of 170. 2 years ago, he created a contingency plan based on this premise. One Arab country would attack another, forcing America into war. The plan laid out specifics for U.S. troop deployment. After Iraq invaded Kuwait, General Schwarzkopf reached for his plan and presented it. A key reason America was able to respond almost immediately.
There was never any doubt in my mind that we were going to get air superiority very quickly. We were going to control the air, but what I needed was tank killers in here. So now I got the tank killers in here, and I got the people that are going to maintain them and keep them flying. And we're all feeling a lot better about the situation. Let's face it, if he dares come across that border and come down here, I'm completely confident that we're going to kick his butt when he gets here. And it's going to be because of you folks right here. We're counting on you.
Selling the plan was the mission of Stormin' Norman's two bosses, General Colin Powell, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and Dick Cheney, Secretary of Defense. Powell, the first black and the youngest man to rise to the nation's highest military post, had been a national security advisor to President Reagan.
I'd like to see this thing solved peacefully. We've got no desire to go out and hurt a bunch of Iraqis. We've got no desire to get any of our folks hurt.
The New York-born son of Jamaican immigrants calls himself just a foot soldier. Some say he's more than that. Maybe a vice president one day.
If hostilities begin, there's only one possible outcome that's acceptable, and that's absolute total victory.
Cheney, a proven politician, was Chief of Staff for President Ford. In the House of Representatives, he was Republican whip. Powell and Cheney convinced the president to send troops immediately, lots of troops. America's arsenal of might was rolled out.
We would be using capabilities that were far more lethal, far more accurate, and far more effective than anything we have ever used before.
Some of America's new high-tech weaponry had never been battle-tested. The Tomahawk cruise missile fired from the sea. Manufacturers said it could travel from Boston Harbor to RFK Stadium in Washington and pass through the goalposts. But with lives on the line, would it score every time? Or the Patriot, the anti-missile missile. Could it take on and destroy a Soviet-built Scud?
Okay, now you can see the big picture there where the range is. I'm going to scale down. I'm going to freeze that map.
Or would sophisticated computers and radar aboard America's wide array of fighters and bombers hold up after thousands of sorties? On paper, the Abrams tank is the world's finest. Equipped with chemical and biological protection for the crew and ammunition capable of penetrating the Iraqi tanks. But could the Abrams be stopped by fine desert sand? The Army's Apache helicopter, fast, accurate, can fight at night and in bad weather. But delicate sensors in its nose had never been exposed to desert heat every day. The foot soldiers are equipped with an improved M16 rifle with twice the range of the Iraqis' AK-47 and twice as many parts. Sand could be a problem.
Right, talk to me.
A most important unknown, the men and women who would be operating all this destructive equipment. Well-trained, but few had tasted battle. They would face an army of 1 million, thousands of tanks and thousands of artillery pieces, chemical weapons, and above all, veterans of the Iran-Iraq War.
I want peace, not war. But if there must be war, we will not permit our troops to have their hands tied behind their backs.
The Commander-in-Chief's assurances had a pumping up effect. And without the first sign of death, the nation burst into patriotic fervor not felt or expressed since World War II.
We cannot allow any dictator ruler to ruthlessly invade another country and torture and kill its inhabitants. There's a danger of non-involvement, of apathy.
We are running out of these. I've been trying on the phone all day trying to get more of them. There seems to be a lot of support.
Patriotism became as commercialized as Christmas. Despite a recession, people were buying, and manufacturers of war keepsakes couldn't seem to meet the national demand. But as the weeks passed, popularity polls showed a steady drop in the president's ratings. The adrenaline surge was over. Americans pondered the horrors of war. Rapid sales of gas masks in surplus stores, a sign of growing fears of terrorism.
You got your mask, you may be a survivor.
And Americans felt sorrow for the thousands of families split up by the sudden call to arms. The Petersons, both in the military, had to leave their 17-month-old son behind.
For a mother to leave her child, it's one of the hardest things to do.
No, he's waving goodbye.
Come here, babies. Come on. Come on, babies. Come on.
I had a problem after kids grew up and got grown. I had a problem hauling in 1,000 bales of hay putting up in yonder, you know.
Yeah, but no, you're not here. I do all these things myself.
In Clay County, Alabama, Monroe and Flossie Wood watched as 8 family members went off to war.
You know, sometimes something has come across my mind, and it tells me, say, that you're not gonna see your children anymore.
The patriotic spirit in this rural county, with its monument to fallen soldiers of past wars, was strained as never before.
You got to look after each other. So please take care of your buddy.
The president's November call-up was for 100,000 more GIs, changing America's military stance from defensive to offensive. The shield was now becoming a sword.
It ain't worth it. It ain't worth the life of one of my boys. Well, I'll get killed for the oil. Let them have it.
I don't understand because of the fighting, if it does happen to fighting over the oil. But right now, I don't think we should be there. But if they call, then I have to support the military.
Good night.
No. Won't be tonight.
Got to have my baby with me.
He took Billy away from me with the Lionel unit, and then Daddy and Uncle Leon and John David and all them away this time. You'll get through, baby.
How you doing?
Okay. I just want him to be here.
National Guard units headed out from Clay County with Thanksgiving and Christmas just ahead.
It's like you're just going through the motions. You can't, you hear Christmas songs and you think of the past Christmases, and it's just real special with families.
Good luck to you fellas. Good luck. Good to see all of you.
The president worked to boost morale and underscore resolve. He spent Thanksgiving with the troops. His approval rating had sagged to its lowest level since Iraq invaded Kuwait.
People at home say, we don't need more Vietnam. That's right, there won't be any. If anybody's asked to fight, they're going to fight and win.
Some politicians, sensing America's new concerns, reacted to the president's call-up of additional troops with anger. They argued the president was sending the nation to war without the consent of Congress, an unconstitutional act.
If anything is clear about the Constitution, it is that, as Abraham Lincoln said, the Constitution was written precisely to ensure that no one man should hold the power of bringing this oppression upon us.
We ought to send a clear signal here that there's a willingness and a resolve to threaten the use of force in a credible way.
And in the street,
What do we want? When do we want it now?
what had been small outbursts of anti-war feelings grew larger. Still the minority, but now a factor in the public debate over how far the country should go.
No blood for oil! No blood for oil! No blood for oil! 1, 2, 3, 4! Here's what your bloody war! 5, 6, 7, 8! We will not cooperate! What do we want?
Where's the guns? What are you guys burning the flag for?
You don't like this country, get the hell out. I'll buy you a ticket.
This is our country, too.
What do we want? What do we want? What do we want? What right do we have to go into another country, put troops there and say, yes, we are the guardians of freedom. We are guarding our economic interests.
We are there for peace. We are there because peace has got to be done at all costs.
Hey, hey, ho, ho, George Bush has got to go. Hey, hey, ho, ho, George Bush has got to go.
The president tried to allay the country's fears by vowing the crisis in the Gulf would never become another Vietnam. But in Congress, not everyone was convinced.
To those of us for whom Vietnam remains much more than just a distant memory, there are analogies which create deep-seated doubts over the apparent willingness of this administration's rush to war.
If we show a lack of resolve, this Congress will be sending the wrong message to the world, which could encourage others to copy what Hussein has done.
In dedicating the battlefield at Gettysburg, our greatest Republican president, Abraham Lincoln, said, "We here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain." President Bush cannot make that statement if he goes to war on the indefensible timetable he has set.
We have the power to declare war. What we do not have is the power to make war. The President, ladies and gentlemen, must be able to deal with foreign hostilities with a free hand.
In a close vote,
The yeas are 52, and the nays are 47.
the President's action would ultimately be endorsed. America listened, analyzed, agonized, and prayed. The deadline for war approached. Americans beat back the ghost of Vietnam and zeroed in on Saddam Hussein. Defeating him would be worth a bloody battle, provided the fight is quick and the casualties low.
The question is, are we just going to fight in Kuwait, or are we going to level Baghdad? No comment.
Mr. Saddam Hussein, you can simply do what the world is calling upon you to do. Get out.
January 11th, Secretary of State James Baker with Air Force pilots in Saudi Arabia. The U.S.-led coalition is war-ready. So are these pilots. Ready to test their cunning, courage, and their aircraft.
We passed the brink at midnight on January 15th.
And after the deadline, then what?
You will not have to wait much longer for an answer to that question.
But there's another question, not easily answered. How could diplomacy succeed building an international coalition, mounting a naval blockade?
The draft resolution has been adopted.
And passing a dozen UN Security Council resolutions against Iraq, but fail to prevent war.
Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, we will now put the draft resolution to the vote.
On November 29th, the UN Security Council authorizes the use of force if Iraq does not withdraw by January 15th. Only the second such vote in the UN's 45-year history. With Trump card now in hand, President Bush makes a surprise offer, face-to-face talks with Baghdad.
I am not suggesting discussions that will result in anything less than Iraq's complete withdrawal from Kuwait, restoration of Kuwait's legitimate government, and freedom for all hostages.
The same day, Iraqi soldiers deliver food to the beleaguered U.S. Embassy in Kuwait after cutting off food, water, and power months earlier. 89 small bruised apples, 45 tangerines, 80 oranges, cucumbers, 155 of them, and 1 case of cigarettes. And 6 days later, Iraq's president announces he will release the remaining hostages. Tearful reunions, and the world wonders. Is Saddam signaling he might also compromise on Kuwait? But the two sides can't agree on a date for talks. Bush had initially suggested any time before the UN January 15th deadline. But when Saddam insists on January 12th, the White House says no. 3 days wouldn't leave enough time for Iraq to pull its troops out.
Saddam Hussein is not too busy to see on short notice Kurt Waldheim, Billy Brandt, Muhammad Ali, Ted Heath, John Connally, Ramsey Clark, and many, many others on very short notice. And it simply is not credible that he cannot, over a 2-week period, make a couple of hours available for the Secretary of State on an issue of this importance.
Finally, the breakthrough. Secretary of State James Baker and Foreign Minister Tariq Aziz will meet in Geneva on January 9th.
You're smiling, sir. Does that mean you're hopeful?
I always smile.
Is there really any chance to avoid a war? The unresolved issues are formidable. Not only the future of Kuwait, but also Iraq's weapons of mass destruction and the question of Israel's 25-year occupation of Palestinian land. Making talks more difficult, the atmosphere is inflamed with rhetoric.
It is Saddam Hussein who lied to his Arab neighbors. It was a ruthless assault. 2 weeks ago, I made mention of the Nuremberg trials. The world will hold him accountable. What we are looking at is good and evil, right and wrong.
In Baghdad, the rhetoric is equally tough, as Saddam appeals to Arabs and the Muslim world with personal attacks on Bush. The talks in Geneva bring a temporary ceasefire in the war of words, but nothing to prevent the bombs and bullets. Baker and Aziz began with a handshake. News photographers ask for this pose. The talks are calm, direct, intense.
Mr. Baker, why did you have to break?
Because we've been at it for quite a few hours. Everybody wanted to wash their hands.
A last-ditch peace effort, but after 6.5 hours of anxious talk...
Regrettably, ladies and gentlemen, I heard nothing today that, in over 6 hours, I heard nothing that suggested to me any Iraqi flexibility whatsoever on complying with the United Nations Security Council resolutions.
Iraq insists, as it has since August, any withdrawal from Kuwait must be linked to the Palestinian issue. Again, the United States refuses linking the two issues, insisting that rewards Iraq's aggression.
And is it your conclusion after this meeting that war with the United States is inevitable?
Well, that's up to the American administration to decide.
With the Geneva talks talked out, embassies in Baghdad began evacuating their personnel. Hospitals prepare for casualties.
When do we want peace? When do we want it now? Never again! Never again!
Anti-war protests continue across the United States. But public opinion polls show 62% approving military force to get Iraq out of Kuwait, up 20 points since the crisis began. Hope for an 11th hour peace rests with UN Secretary General Javier Pérez de Cuellar. He had gone to Baghdad in September and returned empty-handed. After this last meeting on January 13th, he is asked, will there be war?
It is something which only, if you believe in God, only God knows.
Only God. Only George Bush. Only Saddam Hussein. Pérez de Cuellar makes a last personal appeal on January 15th, the UN deadline. Saddam does not reply.
Regrettably, ladies and gentlemen, I heard nothing today that, in over 6 hours, I heard nothing that suggested to me any Iraqi flexibility whatsoever.
Mr. Foreign Minister, if the war starts in the Middle East, in the Gulf, will you attack Israel?
Yes, absolutely yes.
Just 2 hours ago, Allied air forces began an attack on military targets in Iraq and Kuwait. These attacks continue as I speak.
On January 13th, 2 days before the United Nations deadline, I was in Baghdad to interview President Saddam Hussein. I began to smell war, although I hoped it would not come. A very senior Iraqi official told me his nation would ignore the deadline because Iraq could not stomach being told what to do, even by the world community. Civilian militias sprang up on street corners. Boys were given guns and automatic rifles. People hoarded food. Iraqi officials told me the interview with Saddam would come 1 or 2 days after the January 15th deadline. I was forced to wait for Saddam, to wait in Baghdad with CNN correspondents Peter Arnett and John Holloman, to wait for what came.
Something is happening outside. The skies over Baghdad have been illuminated. We're seeing bright flashes going off all over the sky. Peter?
Now the sirens are sounding for the first time.
The liberation of Kuwait has begun. In conjunction with the forces of our coalition partners, the United States has moved under the code name Operation DesertStorm to enforce the mandates of the United Nations Security Council. As of 7:00 p.m., Operation DesertStorm forces were engaging targets in Kuwait and Iraq.
Kind of scary to think what damage we're going to be doing and how many lives we're going to be taking.
Whoa, holy cow. That was a large airburst that we saw. It was filling the sky with dust.
And I think, John, that airburst took out the telecommunications. Yeah. Now you may hear the bombs now. If you're still with us, you're going to hear the bombs now. They are hitting the center of this city.
Just one comment. Clearly, I've never been there, but this feels like we're in the center of hell.
Now, the 28 countries with forces in the Gulf area have exhausted all reasonable efforts to reach a peaceful resolution, have no choice but to drive Saddam from Kuwait by force.
And Bush, the Satan, has perpetrated his crime. He and the criminal, and the great battle has been initiated, the mother of all battles.
We will not fail.
There continue to be these flashes of light off in the distance to the south. Peter Arnett, your reflection.
Yes, John, I couldn't help thinking as I heard the bombs, the distant bombs.
Well, from what I saw last night, I cannot imagine if this goes on more than another day that they would have any kind of will to fight at all.
Buddy, nice. Good job. Good job, buddy. It was pretty wild to drop them for 10 years and not ever see one go off like that.
We are flying a total of about 2,000 air sorties of all types each day. More than 80% of all of those sorties have successfully engaged their targets.
This is my counterpart's headquarters in Baghdad. Headquarters of the Air Force. Keep your eye on all sides of the building as the airplane overflies the building and drops the bomb down through the center of the building.
This is the city that Saddam Hussein said he would attack with missiles should the multinational force attack him.
It is a just war, and it is a war with which good will prevail.
Will there ever be a greater battle than the battle in which, on the one side, God leading, and on the other, devil or Satan leading?
There is no one more devoted, more committed to the hard work of freedom than every soldier and sailor, every Marine, airman, and Coast Guardsman, every man and woman now serving in the Persian Gulf.
We're going home. We're going home alive. We're not going to go home dead. We're going to go home alive with a big victory under our belt.
The winds of change are with us now, and we move toward the next century more confident than ever that we have the will at home and abroad to do what must be done, the hard work of freedom.
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to help us produce more compelling historical content like this, please like, comment below, and share this video with fellow history buffs. And of course, be sure to subscribe to help keep history happening.